Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Joaquin Esquivel, Chair of the State Water Board. Today is Wednesday, August 21st, 2019, and it is 9:31, excuse me. And we are continuing from yesterday's meeting, and today's workshop is a continuation of then item number 8, the State Water Board workshop on the System Administrator Policy Handbook for the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Program. I'd like to welcome staff to here today. And Darren, if you'd like, you can start us off.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you. Darren Polhemus, Deputy Director for Division of Drinking Water. With me is David Rice from Office of Chief Counsel. Today's topic is the Draft Administrator Policy Handbook, a key component that we have as a tool for us going forward as we explore our Safe Affordable Drinking Water Fund work. So I want to give a little bit of background. David's going to do a presentation through some of the details of the policy, and this is obviously a workshop item, so we're all ears as to comments we get today and during the comment period as well. Just kind of to start it off as kind of a genesis story. So, I spent years in financial assistance myself, working with small communities, and came to have quite an appreciation of the challenges they face. There are many, almost too long to list in a day, but they're one that always seemed to be there for me was so many times a lot of small communities, especially when we're talking small water systems, we are dealing with people that have full lives, full jobs, and then are expected to act at a highly professional level in order to execute water system grant agreements and contracts and coordinate attorneys. And the reality is those are full-time jobs. I mean, that's what we have at a full-size water system doing it. And it always struck me that we could use someone to step in to help in certain circumstances, both either in a friendly fashion or sometimes like, no, you really need help fashion. So with that in mind, it was one of the ideas we kind of hatched, and in coordination with many partners, statutes were passed that basically brought this to be there. And so we're really appreciative to have the ability to explore this tool. I think it's very unique. I don't know of any other states that's going there. When I meet with counterparts of other states in drinking water issues, they're both envious and maybe a little tentative about like, well, I want to see how it works for you before I stick my neck out and try it. So there's a lot to learn in this process as we go through there. And that's all a long way of saying this is our very first administrative policy handbook. And as I said yesterday, our intent is that we're going to learn from the second time we actually issue an order for an administrator, and the third time and the fourth time, and I know we will be back here right away. So our pledge basically to the broader community is that we have no expectations that this is like perfect or even complete, that really it's a way to get us started into this effort, to meet what the statutes are and to try to add a little bit to that, but to really know that we want to learn from it. And I fully expect, you know, from today and the written comments we get, that we can make changes to this before we bring it back to you, hopefully next month for adoption, with improvements even upon what we're presenting today. So it's rare in my career that we actually have like the very first instance. And if we could call it like, you know, version 0.05 beta, that's what this would be, right? So it's really going to test out, and we're going to grow with it over time. And that's kind of a great way, I think, to, you know, invite participation from everybody today. So with that, I'll have David kind of go through what our presentation is, the details of what we do have in the Administrator Handbook at this point, some rules around what it is, why it's, you know, it's not a regulation and stuff like that, and then I think that'll set up for comments in the panel to follow and whatnot. So please proceed, David.
Good morning, and I'm David Rice with your Office of Chief Counsel. And before I start moving through the presentation, I'd like to provide a little bit of a brief historical context for how we got here. So the State Water Board's administrator authority is set forth in Health and Safety Code 11686. And last year, the legislature passed and the governor signed Assembly Bill 2501. And among other things, it made some amendments to 11686, and it included a new requirement for the development of an administrator policy handbook. And that needed to be adopted by the state board before the state board could exercise its authority under the Health and Safety Code section. And there's one important element that's worth mentioning, is that consistent with other policy handbooks that the board's adopted or will be considering for adoption in the future, this policy handbook is not subject or is exempt from the Administrative Procedures Act. And that is significant because, as Darren mentioned, there's an anticipation that there will be subsequent amendments in short order, and because we won't need to go through the regulatory process under the APA, we'll be able to be a lot more nimble and responsive when we're making changes to the policy. So, use my clicker. So the Assembly Bill 2501 did include a number of requirements for what needs to be in the policy handbook, and I'd like to go through some of these required elements. One is provisions related to public engagement and outreach, process for selecting the administrator, process for challenging administrator decisions, the development and adoption of a post-administrator drinking water service plan. There's a couple more bullets that didn't make it onto the slide. Minimum qualifications for an administrator, how costs will be divvied up between the State Water Board and the designated water system for the administrator services, and also provisions related to ensuring operational transparency. So moving on to how costs will be divvied up between the designated water system and the State Board. The draft policy divides it up in the following fashion. The State Water Board will be responsible for the administrator's salary and benefits, administrative costs, and by that we mean workspace requirements, computers, other things of that nature, and also extraordinary legal and professional costs. And by that, it's certainly possible that when an administrator starts work at a designated water system, they may need to hire a CPA, a forensic accountant, additional legal help to unwind certain contracts or better understand employee issues. And so those types of extraordinary legal and professional costs would be paid for by the State Water Board. The designated water system would be responsible for ordinary O&M costs as well as project costs, both planning and construction. And the policy does provide that funding may be available for construction, planning projects, and ongoing O&M, subject to fund availability and applicable guidelines and policies. So The policy handbook also includes the process for the selection of the administrator, and the attempt here was to make this fairly consistent with the process that's already set forth in 11686 for the designation of a water system before it can receive administrator services. And so the general process is there will be first a public notice sent by the State Water Board to all ratepayers, renters, property owners, those folks who receive service or water from the designated water system. And that notice would include the name and qualifications of an administrator, as well as services to be provided. There would be a 30-day comment period. Comments would be solicited either by mail or electronically. And after that, the State Water Board would be able to render a decision as to whether that selection of the particular administrator is appropriate. The policy handbook also does include a provision for emergency appointment of an administrator. And this would be in a situation where there would be an imminent threat of serious harm. For example, if a water system was effectively abandoned or there was some kind of acute problem, catastrophic failure, and the water system was unable to handle it in-house. And under this provision, State Water Board would have the ability to immediately appoint an administrator for that particular system. However, following that appointment, the State Water Board would then go through the regular process to kind of confirm that particular appointment. So the minimum qualifications for administrator, I'd like to put a little asterisk here because these particular requirements did not make it into the draft that's posted on the website, but it's intended that these will be added for the one that's brought before the board for adoption. It's a little bit of a challenge to come up with minimum qualifications for an administrator that would meet all the various types of administrators. There may be administrators who would need to be licensed, for example, to actually run a system. There may be those who don't need those licenses but need to be very well versed in actually managing a system. There may be administrators who have a much more limited scope where they're actually just managing a project. And so there's a little bit of a challenge in trying to come up with like a comprehensive list of qualifications. So at this point, it's just fairly general. Any administrator would need the necessary licenses and certifications for that particular administrator assignment, as well as sufficient experience for the nature of the assignment. And all potential administrators would be subject to a background check. So the provisions for public engagement and outreach, there is a requirement that the administrator would hold a meeting as required either by the bylaws, the applicable bylaws, or applicable laws and regulations that pertain to that particular type of water system, if there are any. But in any event, a public meeting would need to be held no less than every 6 months. And at that meeting, the administrator would provide updates on financial health, on planning projects, both those that are underway, have been completed, or are being proposed and contemplated, discussion about any possible alteration to water rates, as well as updates on the system performance. The public meeting would also be required prior to significant actions. And by significant actions, we mean establishing water rates or altering water rates, entering into significant financial commitments, establishing operating budgets. And again, these public meetings are really designed to make sure that there's a lot of transparency in terms of how the public understands what the administrator is doing with regards to that particular system. At each public meeting, there would need to be the opportunity for public comment. And importantly, all actions are designed to ensure the provision of safe drinking water for that particular community. Additionally, there is an expectation that the administrator would avail him or herself of any other means to provide updates, such as flyers and bills, or via email or newsletters. There are some kind of similar provisions or related provisions for ensuring operational transparency. In particular, the administrator would need to make available for public review any adopted and established operating budget, an org chart if there is one, any auditor reports, contracts for professional services, copies of any complaints that the water system has received, as well as any approved post-administrator drinking water plan. And to the extent feasible, these documents should be uploaded and made available on the water system's website. The draft policy handbook does include a process for challenging administrator decisions and for the substitution or replacement of an administrator. Any renter, ratepayer, or property owner has the right to submit a petition, and the petitions can be either for the modification or reversal of a particular administrator decision, as well as a petition for the replacement of the administrator. And so the general process is that a petition seeking modification or reversal of an administrator decision would need to be received by the state board within 30 days of that particular decision. However, and this isn't on there, a petition for the replacement of an administrator can be submitted at any time. And there's currently no timeline for a response to the petition. However, any petition is automatically, the goal would be to turn these petitions around within 90 days if the board decided to take up any of these petitions, and there is an automatic dismissal within 90 days if no action is taken by the state board. The policy also includes provisions related to the post-administrator drinking water service plan. A draft plan is due within 12 months of the administrator commencing his or her responsibility. The plan components include the identification of any technical, managerial, or financial issues that are keeping the system from meeting all standards and providing safe and affordable drinking water, a detailed improvement plan in the shortest possible time frame, additional resources that would need to be brought to bear to implement this plan, an analysis of the feasibility of long-term public or community ownership, as well as the feasibility of consolidation. There is a public meeting required so that the administrator can obtain public input on the drinking water service plan, and there's also a process for approval by the State Water Board. So this plan does ultimately need to be approved by the State Water Board, and it is then incumbent upon the administrator to update the plan if things change. So those are the main elements of the policy as currently drafted. I'm looking to Darren because we were talking, we wanted to provide the end date for the end of the comment period.
I did look it up. It's, since I didn't have it in memory, it's Wednesday at noon, Wednesday, September 4th is the close of the written comment period. And I would make a quick comment also back on the previous slide on the plan components, I think just for understanding that, we bring the administrators in with the intent that they're not anything but a transitional type of activity. And so that's why we put emphasis on them instantly beginning to try to plan how they're going to, replace themselves and transition the water system into a more permanent state. And I think that's kind of one of the key messages to kind of always remember as we're implementing them. That concludes our report.
Thank you. Initial questions from fellow board members?
No, I'll wait.
One question I did have, it seems to me, particularly listening to the examples yesterday in Lake County, that when natural disasters or emergencies occur in these communities, it is oftentimes the moment at which they are under the most stress and have the least resources. So when we talk about the emergency provisions, or at least emergency assignment of administrators, has there been much thought about how that might function as a component ultimately of sort of emergency response at the board, or how that interplays at all? Has there?
Yeah, there's been discussion about it. Obviously, we've faced some situations where they could be helpful in trying to step in and provide some support and leadership. The tricky part is that I think mostly what we see in the immediate aftermath is more of a situation where the water system, they know their water system and their leadership is in place and there, but they are not set up to have mutual aid assistance come in and then provide that mutual aid to try to get them back operating. And then I can see the administrator possibly providing a function like in the Cobb area that was an example yesterday. Then they went on for quite some time planning on how to come about and turn, and there could be scenarios similar where there would be an administrator that could be limited in function, and that's part of what David mentioned, is they wouldn't take over the whole water system. They would be like a construction manager or a project manager tasked with pulling pieces together in a specific avenue, and I can see him being helpful there. But we definitely want to be cautious about the current operational structure with local emergency oversight and how we set that up. And on a side note, one of the things I'm actively trying to now get into the Safe Affordable Drinking Water Plan, the report that we draft for you, is an analysis of how many water systems are and are not part of a mutual aid warning system. I did a little browsal through and found that almost all of the foothill systems are not part of the mutual aid system, and they are in the highest fire risk area, which was a bit of a surprise to me. So we've had this scenario happen a couple times, and so with some investigation, we need to highlight kind of that situation, and so that'll come out in some future reports.
Great, really appreciate that. And looking forward to the staff I know we'll be getting on the emergency response front generally, which again, I think it will be at least more resource to be able to have those sorts of discussions and insights as to what are the needs for particularly these smaller systems that are already struggling.
Yes.
So, thank you, Darren. Janine, do we have public comment? Okay. We'll move to public comment. And if you do wish to comment, please get your blue speaker card over to Janine. We'll start with Evelyn Windle from WeTap. Hello, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Chair, board members, staff, and all participants in this session, thank you for your attention and opportunity to speak today. I'm Evelyn Wendell, and the founding and executive director of WeTap. We're a boutique nonprofit dedicated to safe, clean, and affordable drinking water for all communities in California, with the emphasis on the public drinking water fountain. WeTap developed and released the WeTap Drinking Fountain Finder app, and we are the one of the founding partners of Tap Water Day, a celebration of our drinking water and public water fountain. There are communities in California that do not have access to clean drinking water. There are communities and neighborhoods whose drinking water is tainted with lead and other chemicals. And there are neighborhoods with access to safe drinking water, but the water is discolored or has foul odors. Getting plentiful, safe, clean, and affordable water to these communities is and should be our top priority. Congratulations and thank you for the Safe Affordable Drinking Water Program. Times like these give us hope. All communities have the basic right to public drinking water, and we are fortunate that most Californians have access to municipal water that is dependable and reliable. However, too many people do not trust our water supply, and this has caused severe stress for our state. Families choose to buy bottled water in single-use plastic containers or sugary drinks because they do not trust tap water as the best choice of hydration, and these decisions, these actions are expensive to health and to our environment, to our budgets, and to all of California. We are literally breathing in plastic now. On average, the U.S. purchases and consumes close to 50 billion plastic bottles a year, with only 40% being recycled, and we know all the challenges with recycling. Bottling and shipping increases the cost and results in unnecessary increase in carbon emissions, and the cost of bottled water can cost $7 a gallon. On average, LA DWP's water costs 2 cents a gallon. I'm sorry. In 2018, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power supplied approximately 160 billion gallons of pure, clean, refreshing water to 4 million people in the city of LA, all less than half a penny a gallon. LADWP staff tested 200 constituents in the water, performed close to 120,000 tests on samples taken throughout the city to ensure the highest quality. In many parts of the world, access to safe drinking water is a luxury, one that many Angelenos take for granted, or worse, mistakenly fear tap water and instead opt for bottled water. Public water fountains not only provide free drinking water for residents, but also serve as a reminder of our expansive water supply system. The narrative about drinking water needs to evolve. The best way of doing this is to educate our children about California's municipal drinking water supply system, how our water is delivered, our challenges, and how we test for quality and the tap water is the best option. We need effective partnerships with our schools. WeTap is based in LA, and we work with LA Unified School District to establish a drinking water quality program. I have a prepared summary for your review that they've written up. LA Unified voluntarily and proactively reduced lead levels to 5 parts per billion per fountain for their 40,000 drinking fountains. And they serve over 700,000 students, teachers, and staff. 75% of those student body qualifies for assisted lunch programs. LA Unified is a partner now in Tap Water Day, and for all of us, they are willing to share information about their experience and to assist other school districts with their unique challenges. Each fountain actually has its own personality. We need to use the public drinking water fountain as both a trusted source of drinking water and as a symbol of water for all. Public drinking water fountains need to be a part of our civic pride. A robust drinking water fountain network in all communities needs our focus in our parks and our transportation hubs and wherever people come together. Confidence and pride in our tap water will improve resilience and set important community standards for future generations to be water stewards in this time of water scarcity, climate change, severe pollution in our oceans and land, economic hardships for so many, and of course a time where, sadly, there are so many health needs in our communities. If we collectively take responsibility of caring about tap water, we will enhance our civility and our lives. We'll have positive social changes. Drinking fountains are a powerful link of connectedness. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next, I'd like to call up Seamus Gurin from Self-Help Enterprises. And please do correct me on the pronunciation of your last name. I apologize.
No, that was perfect. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Good morning. My name is Seamus Gurin with Self-Help Enterprises. And Self-Help Enterprises over the last 45 years has supported over 200 communities, low-income communities in the San Joaquin Valley, improve their water and wastewater systems, and improve their technical, managerial, and financial capacity. So this is a theme today very dear to all of our hearts, and we appreciate the opportunity to support the State Board as it embarks into new territory and exploring and developing this role of an administrator for many of the systems that we work with, as well as others throughout the state. Today, again, we look forward to supporting the board with our comments today, a letter to follow, and the implementation. But we want to keep in mind 3 things especially. Community participation in the selection of an administrator, fostering meaningful engagement between the administrator and the community that it serves, and community involvement in shaping the role of the administrator itself. So I'll take those in turn, starting with the selection of an administrator. As the policy is now, the State Board selects the administrator and presents that choice to the community through a public hearing. We hope that this process could be a more collaborative one. Perhaps the State Board, with its insight, could pre-screen the qualifications of 2 to 3 administrators and present them to a community so that the community can hear from the administrator candidates directly from the State Board and make an informed choice. We hope that this will help from day 0 put the administrator in a position that it knows that it must be responsive to community needs and concerns. We also suggest to that end that administrators be appointed for a term perhaps of 2 years, so that every 2 years the State Board and administrator candidates return to the community to, again, present themselves and keep everybody accountable in that way. While the administrator is in place, we also want to make sure that engagement's occurring. The policy currently calls for meetings to be held every 6 months, and we're not sure that that will entirely be sufficient to have that communication and that relationship between the administrator and the community. Instead, we'd suggest that at minimum it be quarterly, but of course we'd encourage monthly meetings, as many communities are used to, with their special districts or mutual water companies. We'll also note that translation will likely be necessary in many of the communities that we serve in the San Joaquin Valley, and would hope that that would be provided by the State Board through the administrator or by the State Board directly. I also want to focus on the post-administrator drinking water service plan. We celebrate that this is an ambition right up front, that already we're looking at ways to end administratorship and move on so that the system, wherever possible, is transferred back safely to the community. And with that, then, we acknowledge that the administrator and community must be working and communicating effectively together. And so we look forward to supporting the state board, as it will no doubt be involved in that process, as well as being involved directly as a technical assistance provider. Lastly, I want to offer a comment on shaping the role of the administrator. And it sounds like the state board is looking to move rather quickly on this. And if I can, I'd like to suggest that the state board consider holding a hearing like today, or a series in regions where the state board intends to have administrators be installed. That would be a way for residents to be able to comment on this process, share their concerns, their insights, and I think especially of communities that have experienced receivership, which is perhaps the most comparable management scenario thus far. With that, the policy is a very important and special opportunity, and again, we thank you for the opportunity to participate in commenting on it today, and look forward to seeing it develop.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful comments. Next, I'd like to call up Mahendra Misra from Water Health International. And Janine, do we have any further cards? Okay, thank you. Yeah, please, for those that are perhaps just arriving, we are in the public comment phase of the item. So if you would like to speak on the item, please do get your blue speaker card from the back of the room to Janine. Thank you. Mr. Misra.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mahendra Mishra, and I represent Water Health International. Just a quick background on Water Health International. Water Health International is a California-based company that has been providing clean drinking water to communities overseas, primarily in Asia and Africa, and in very challenging conditions. And so we have figured out that we have a model that deals with how to interact with the community and how to implement a solution that's really cost-effective. And so we would like to bring the same model and concept and experience to California, since we are a California-based company. And we are really excited about the new administrator policy, and then the fact that the administration, an administrator will be appointed. And we are looking forward to the clarity that we provided after getting all the public input. But a few comments that I would like to make is that the theme that is very common here is that the solution that needs to be provided to the community is fast, and it needs to be very cost effective. That way, then the community either has the resources to pay for the system and the operation, and also then it kind of reduces the burden on the state on the state fund to provide for the project. And so what I would like to recommend as part of the selection of the administrator is that in addition to the technical and managerial experience in selection of the administrator, but I think the guidelines should also look at the experience of the administrator in working in challenging conditions, and particularly in having experience in combining all the experience in operation management, sourcing, technical, and especially in challenging conditions, and devising a comprehensive, cost-effective way in running the system, in installing and running the system. So that's my input, and we will be summarizing other inputs for the water board in due course before the September 4 deadline. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to call up Paul Boyer from Self-Help Enterprises, please. Morning.
Chairman Esquivel and board members, I'll just add briefly to what Seamus had earlier, this on separate item, and that is that sometimes if a entity is in a situation where it makes sense to have an administrator for water and they operate other utilities, it might make sense to look at whether there should be an administrator for, say, sewer along with water. And one reason I bring that up is we're working with a particular community that may be in line to be administrator on the water side, but they still have to operate their sewer system. They still need to pay someone to collect the bills for sewer. They still need to pay for insurance for the overall entity. They still need to pay for annual audit and everything else that are fixed costs. When they no longer have that water rate structure to charge to help cover those costs, they may then have to raise their sewer rates through Prop 218, which is not so easy. And so, again, I just hope that, it's kind of maybe looking holistically how best to deal with those kind of situations.
Really appreciate those comments, Mr. Boyer. In sanitation being an important part of the human right to water, we're always trying to be mindful, and because to your point, you go into a community, it isn't just the drinking water system, it's the wastewater system as well, and it's why across the state you so often see agencies that do waste and drinking water as well in places. So it's a good point, and one that I'd like to hear further thought from staff on, and how we can maybe accomplish multiple things. I imagine it lends itself well. I mean, I know on the septic sewer side, we recently got mandatory consolidation authorities, not unlike our drinking water authorities. So it does continue to beg this question: how we can kind of comprehensively address communities as we go in and do this work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mr. Boyer brings up something I hadn't even contemplated, as he usually does when I've worked with him over the years. So thank you. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, but no, that's totally correct. We were laser focused on water systems, and a lot of the small ones are just water systems. So there's certainly a big breadth of that, but he brings up a good point. I think actually we may have to contemplate whether the statutes allow that, and this could be a future ask to be included, but it's a point well taken.
Really appreciate the comment. I'd like to call up Jonathan Nelson from Community Water Center.
Hi, good morning, Chair and members. Jonathan Nelson with the Community Water Center. I'll keep it brief, and we're looking forward to the panel discussion, and I think our colleagues at Leadership Council are going to make a number of points that we're going to strongly support. But just really quickly, we are supportive of the use of this tool. We helped pass the original statute. We also think that there could be real challenges with implementation if we don't do this right. And I think one area that we've already expressed is that engaging with the community is going to be really critical for getting this right. Our vision for this tool is that administrators be community accountable, and that we really work to be thoughtful and deliberate about how are we building both connections with and into the community with regards to these administrators, instead of being sort of this far away, removed third-party entity that the community has no engagement with at all, and to also look at what are maybe some creative multi-benefits that we could derive for the community as part of implementation of the administrators, such as workforce development, just to give one example. So I think we on our end recognize that we have a lot of thinking that we need to put into this over the next couple months, and we recognize that the draft handbook is just a start, although we will be providing comments on that, but really want to put a strong plea out there early to make sure that we're really rolling up our sleeves with the communities themselves on this, because we both see opportunity, but also potential real challenge with this if we don't implement right. So thank you.
And before we move to our panel then, I'd like to call up Sergio Carranza from Pueblo Unido.
Morning, Chairman Esquivel, board members. I was actually not planning to speak this morning, but after hearing all the different perspectives about this proposed program, it is so critical for me to convey to the board that in deciding how this program is going to be implemented, not only in addition to what is being presented as a draft, we also need to take in consideration that every single community has different dynamics, different priorities, different ways to resolve the issues about drinking water and sanitation as well. So in choosing an administrator, it has to be carefully taken in consideration the expertise or in the work done, the background of a specific key holders, stakeholders in those particular communities, so that they can respond appropriately to those concerns. Another concern is that we also don't want to make this another bureaucratic process. It is definitely a great idea. We are in support of that, Pueblo Unido in support to this initiative, but we don't want to create another bureaucratic step that is going to definitely pose another obstacle in trying to respond adequately to the implementation of the projects. And also, in addition to that, we have different structures that happen, which are part of the dynamics of every community. In the case of the Eastern Coachella Valley, we have a lot of mobile home parks, the largest concentration of mobile home parks, geographically speaking, in California. So we are tackling this in a different way. We have been able to create a Unión de Polancos, which is a 501c3, where we're actually creating those conditions for families to be definitely have access and voice about the decision-making in terms of implementation, but not only that, about public policy. They are the one who actually are interacting with Pueblo Unido so that we can actually bring and provide this feedback that I'm actually presenting today about not only interim solutions, but also long-term sustainable solutions. So those are the recommendations I will strongly suggest to ensure that this program will definitely be successfully implemented. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. I'd like to transition to our panel now then. Yeah, as we transition, yeah, by all means.
So as we're
Board Member
transitioning to the panel, I wanted to make a few comments because I'm going to have to step out early and may not be here for the full panel. So I think, as many of the commenters said, this is a great opportunity, but also a great risk, and it's very much a learning experience. And I think given that, I would really hope that as we develop this program and learning, that we really are deliberate about doing evaluation and reflection throughout this process on each of our administrator experiences. I think, as was said, each community is going to be different. Each administrator will have different strengths. And so I do hope that we, or I would want to make sure that staff are building in points of evaluation and reflection, both with the advisory committee, with this board, and also with each of the communities that are, to which administrators are appointed, to get some direct feedback about how this process is working, where there's opportunities for improvement. So I am glad that we have so many people on this panel, and some, I think, our one administrator experience here to talk with us. And I know Isabel Solorio is from Linares and able to speak to one of the communities that has experienced receivership. And so I think those are, I'm really excited that we have such an accomplished and important number of panelists, but that we're really learning from the experiences that we already have. And I hope that that continues as we evolve this program. Lastly, I do hope that we include explicit needs to do bilingual communication where appropriate and needed, and that we really have at the center of this community accountability and access. I think one of the biggest dangers here is that separation, and so I appreciate that that continues to be a focus. So with that, and again, I apologize, I'm going to have to step out in about 15 minutes. I'm going to miss a lot of the panel, but I will watch it and look forward to following up with you all. Thank you.
Yes, and Board Member Firestone is leaving for good reason as she makes her way to confirmation this afternoon. So she will be there in very strong support. Glad. Yeah, we can all just march over there afterwards, you know. I think most of us will be. So thank you all, as Laurel said, for this is a very incredible and dynamic panel, and so really appreciate you taking the time to join and continue to help us reflect on the Administrator Manual, how it can best work, and really kind of elevate a lot of discussions you have already been involved in for so long here. So thank you. I think I have here that Russ, you'll be starting us. So Mr. Bryden, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chair. Board members.
I think your mic may not be on, sorry.
Yes? Thank you. Thank you, Chair, board members, staff, for having me. My name is Russ Bryden. I work for the County of Los Angeles, and I have the great responsibility of being your first state administrator. I am the state administrator for, or I was, I should say, I was the state administrator for Sativa Los Angeles County Water District, no relation to the County of Los Angeles. And today I'll share some of my experiences as the state administrator and then as the temporary successor agency. So, clicker. Thank you. Magic, very good. So my presentation today will be sharing some of my experiences in this role, but first some context for Sativa so you can understand the challenges that we encountered. Sativa is Compton. When I grew up, Compton was primarily African American. It's transitioned. It's now largely Latino, and not just Latino, but immigrant Latino. Spanish is predominantly the language spoken. In fact, 90% of my customer interactions are only in Spanish. Sativa is relatively small for an urban water system. It has 1,600 connections. They are all residential, and it serves about 7,000 customers, at least according to the census. So again, this is a very dense neighborhood. I suspect that there are documentation concerns with some folks, and that 7,000 number may be significantly larger. Sativa has a number of operational challenges. It has only 2 wells, both of which are in a very poor state, subject to frequent breakdown, and there's no storage and no interconnections. So what does that mean? If your well isn't pumping, water isn't coming out, water isn't going to people's homes. We experienced just ongoing challenges trying to keep water flowing to people's homes. And then, of course, Sativa is it serves a disadvantaged community. And it's not just disadvantaged, but it's severe DAC. We have pockets of annual household income in the 20,000s, and I think the average is something like high 30s or low 40,000. So very, very low income. So that's the setting for applying the first administrator. Let me see if I can work the magic again. There we go. So the challenges that Sativa faced, years and years of brown water complaints. State testing and local testing showed that there were no primary water quality violations or issues. It was largely secondary. It was color, it was odor, it was turbidity, and largely manganese. But the public had lost confidence in the water that their government entity was serving them. It came out brown, just as that picture shows up there. It was intermittent, it wasn't continuous, but it was enough that folks didn't trust their tap water at all. That being said, there was no indication from us looking from the outside in that there were any issues with financial insolvency, that there was unperformed maintenance or deferred maintenance, that there was any lack of technical ability, and really no indication of failing mechanical or electrical equipment. It looked like they just had a brown water manganese problem, that the solution might be as simple as a treatment system to remove manganese. It was nothing like that. It was far more complicated. Sativa attempted system flushing in 2018 that basically blew up their system. They had months and months on end of solid brown water being delivered to customers. At one point, the County of Los Angeles had to open their emergency operations center and provide bottled water to all customers. And then those secondary exceedances continued for approximately 4 months after that incident. That led to media attention, it led to attention from regulators, and then finally the plug was pulled, legislation was passed, and the state administrator program was implemented. So there we go. The initial assessment. This is us looking from the inside, finally on the inside now. So my job as the administrator was to quickly evaluate where they stood. We know very little from the outside. We know what they report, what they publish in audits, if they do annual financial audits, and basically their water quality, but we know very little of the inner workings. So once we got on the inside, my first task, the administrator's first task, was to perform a rapid financial and operational assessment to get our own view, our own understanding of exactly where they stood. It was frightening, and this is going to be one of our lessons learned, I think. They were financially insolvent. There was no indication of this on the outside. They had essentially $0 in their checking account. They had approximately $10,000 in their LAIF, their savings account. It was down from $400,000 approximately 12 months before that. They were $60,000 behind in bills, $60,000, and their monthly income is something like $114,000. My second day there, the phones were turned off. I thought that it was just transitioning to county. No, there were insufficient funds, a check bounced, or they didn't pay the bill. The phones were turned off my second day there. We lost the internet in the third week for the same reason as we were sorting through trying to understand what was happening. And then to top it all off, Sativa had taken out a private loan. They had a $30,000 balloon payment due 30 days after we took over as administrator. I have no idea how they would be able to make that payment. There was no money to do that, and they were already behind on their bills to the point that services were being turned off. So that's the financial side. None of this we saw from the outside. In terms of infrastructure, equally as critical. It seems as though that they didn't invest in preventative maintenance. There was no flushing of their distribution system, no valve exercising, and no capital infrastructure work done for at least as far back as that I'm aware of. Sativa has no inventory of equipment or parts. Anytime that they need to do something, they run over to Home Depot or the local plumbing store. Quick aside, part of being the administrator is taking over financial accounts. Banks are very quick to transfer debt. I was able to get on Sativa's loan within a day. In terms of access to cash, they're not as friendly. I was ushered into a conference room when I went to the bank to add myself to the signature card. I actually thought they were going to call the police on me. We were able to work through it, but it took over a month to get access to the bank account. I had to use Bank of Russ to make some initial purchases to keep them in water. It was the day before Thanksgiving. The well failed again. We needed parts. We didn't have parts on hand. I couldn't write checks. There was no petty cash. I actually had to use my own money to get them the parts, to get it was a chlorine injection system back online. And none of this we saw. None of this we saw from the outside. They faced a number of other challenges, but we'll get through this. We can talk more in detail in another forum. Perhaps most scary is that Sativa apparently had no financial controls. Controls are things like matching invoices with payment records, getting authorization to make payments. There was very little or none of that. And so there wasn't accountability for how they were spending money. Another quick aside here, when we went to prepare the audit for fiscal year 17-18, there were no financial records for us to go back and verify that these purchases were valid. I had to go contact the banks, contact the credit cards, and get account statements, and then work off the account statements to rebuild their financial position. So again, none of this was apparent from the outside. So, of course, the next step was getting to work. Once we understood how bad the situation is, our first job was to stabilize them. And that's it's one of the benefits of working with a large entity like the County of Los Angeles. So the first thing the county did was float them a loan, $1.4 million to stabilize them financially. We paid off bills. We dealt with their inventory issues. We basically got them on their feet. And we're able to get to a point we could observe to see really truly what their challenges were. We got them through that initial push so that we could take a step back and see operationally and financially just how bad things were. We got to work rebuilding their financial records, trying to understand what they had spent money on, whether or not it was a valid purchase or not, and then really digging into the operational side of stuff to understand why they were having brown water issues. A lot's happened, and I'm going to fast forward. I want to tell you that I spent the last 3 weeks, a very intense period, operational period, doing system flushing. The county brought in some unique, a proprietary system to help us flush Sativa's distribution system. Took about 3 weeks. We did it overnight when folks weren't using water. But I can tell you now that my brown water complaints have basically dropped to almost zero. I think we've done this. I think we've addressed their brown water issue. We'll come back, we'll monitor the system, we'll watch for hot spots, and we'll do system flushing again with this technology. But I think we're ahead on the brown water. But again, brown water was the reason we brought the administrator in. Come to find out, that was just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so I'll skip through this. We know what happens at the end of the administrator. I want to take a second and focus the rest of my talk on lessons learned. I think that's what we can all get out of this, and it will help you with your administrator handbook. The first thing was, as I've shared, No one knew how bad sativa was, looking from the outside. Regulators and legislators took action because of the brown water. They had no idea of the financial side of things. Brown water was serious, but it was just one of many, many issues. And so I think our task is going to be to identify a tool to help identify troubled water systems, really those that we need to step in and use the administrator as a GM as opposed to consultant support, and then get them involved. But the trick is to do that without creating a burdensome oversight process that's going to make everybody else, the good actors, struggle along the way. So the first one is no one knew how bad it was, and we need to find a way to identify those folks that really need help. The second piece is something very near and dear to my heart. For the last 9 months, I have lived in Compton, very, very long weeks, working very closely with the community to get them through this situation. The administrator absolutely is not a one-person job. It is a team approach. I can't say that strongly enough, at least in my experience, for the emergency situation at Sativa. And if you want an easy way to remember this, the administrator team, the A team. You really need a team, an A team to go in there. You need someone with operational experience, not just someone with, a small system might require a D2, maybe a D3. Some of these small systems, the problems they encounter are so severe and the maintenance is so far gone that you need experts. You need D5 folks with tons of experience to come in to try to sort that out. On the financial side, we had talked about bringing in forensic accountants and other things to understand where the money went. It's really a team approach to how you do that. So absolutely not a one-person job, even if that one person is just the quarterback leading the rest of the team. Second thing is, it's not cheap to do this. I can tell you that the County of Los Angeles is investing $8 million of its own funds, $8 million in addition to the revenue that Sativa generates to try to stabilize them and then ultimately to transition them to a new service provider. The county has worked very closely with DFA. DFA have been fantastic partners on the financial side. They've been able to get us approximately $1.75 million to do some critical infrastructure improvements. But outside of that, all the operational issues, all of that is the County of Los Angeles. We have no way to recover those funds, $8 million. So we need to figure out a way to deal with that. And then the last couple here. Sativa, as I think many troubled water agencies do, has a number of legal legacy issues. They had ongoing lawsuits, and now the County of Los Angeles has been pulled into that as well. We had certain immunity through AB 1577 for lawsuits initiated against Sativa, but now some of those same plaintiffs have filed lawsuits against the County of Los Angeles for continuing to provide that brown water. Really, really tough spot. And you might use the little saying here of who wants to buy a lawsuit. That's really what you're asking the administrator to do. Last 2 points, really important. DACs have a fear and a mistrust of government. I've seen that throughout my career. Big part of my job was just sitting down and talking to people, listening to them, helping them understand that we truly are here to help, that we are their representative, and earning back their trust. And I'll talk to you offline about the many different ways that we've engaged in that, what's been effective and what's not, and what hasn't. And then finally, emergency powers for an emergency situation. For Sativa, I think there was a push to dissolve the government entity quickly and then consolidate them with a temporary service provider, the county. As Sativa, as the administrator, I had very broad, almost king-like ability to make immediate improvements at Sativa. As soon as Sativa was dissolved and consolidated with the County of Los Angeles, all of that was lost. Every decision had to go back to our Board of Supervisors, a process that usually takes a 3-month lead time for them to be able to consider decisions. And so it's emergency powers for emergency situations, making sure that there's good transparency and engagement with the community, but preserving that for as long as possible during the process. I'm sure you have many questions, but I'll pause here and turn it over to one of my co-panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your insights, Mr. Bryden. Did you have one? Did you want to? Okay, thank you. Really appreciate that. We'll move on to our second panelist, Mr. John Allen from the Water Replenishment District of Southern California.
Thank you. Good
You
morning.
may want to double check that your mic is on.
Is this on?
Now it is, yeah. If it's on, if it's green, it's on.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Allen. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Esquivel and board members. Thank you for inviting the Water Replenishment to participate in this important panel. WRD's Safe Drinking Water Program has operated since 1991 and is intended to promote the cleanup of groundwater resources at specific well locations. That is a map. Behind you is a map of our district. It's 420 square miles. It's about 4,300,000 people, or about 11% of the population of the state of California. It has 43 cities, and it probably has most of the DACs, the disadvantaged communities in Los Angeles County. They're going to have water treatment problems. And anyway, in any event, as I started to say, we've had our safe drinking water program since 1991. At that point, we were just taking wells that either had volatile organic compounds, in which we would make a grant to them to clean it up in 10 years with our assistance, our technical training, or we had a grant program for, a loan program for arsenic and manganese. Again, 10 years, no interest loan to clean it up. And we did that with a well treatment center. And we left them in charge, except for building the well treatment center. Then in about 2014, we began to notice through our monitoring wells that there were disadvantaged communities and very small agencies that were having problems with their water supply, and we wanted to go ahead and help them, at least providing technical experiences so they could apply to the state for the various funds that were created by different propositions to clean up their water supplies. So we started that, as I said, in 2014. Conjunction with that was the problems in Maywood that Assemblyman, at that time, Assemblyman Rendon was getting $1 million through Assembly Bill 240, and we went and got other grants by working with the three mutual companies up there to get it to $2,700,000 to work with Maywood Mutual number 2. We have since also begun work with Maywood Mutuals 1 and 3. We're well on our way to cleaning up Maywood Mutual 2 with the new wellhead treatment center and the other things that they need to get them up and going. Again, we are providing technical, managerial, financial assistance, help to them, but we're not taking them over. We're letting them remain themselves and in control of their own destiny. So we're trying to help them to help themselves. And now we have moved on to Assembly Bill 955 by Assemblyman Mike Gibson from Carson. His area covers Compton and Linwood, and as does now Speaker Rendon's district has Linwood and Maywood and various areas that need help. So we want to, we're looking to get $800,000 so that we can go out and work with the disadvantaged communities. There's 29 in our district, in the Water Replenishment District. 29 of those districts, work with them voluntarily if they want to come forward, and already 11 have come forward and asked for our help. More as the word gets out that we can help them. So, and our goal is to assess them with Assembly Bill 955 and the $800,000, assess what needs to be done and to work with them so that they can apply for these grants. Then we will work with them to make sure that the planning, the design, and the implementation of these projects is done with the partnership with your board, the State Water Resources Control Board, and then turn it back over to these individual agencies, these very small agencies with very small populations, with very small connections. So I welcome any other questions that you may have, and thank you for your partnership with us.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. We'll go on to our next panelist, Ms. Katie Porter from California Urban Water Agencies. Hello, Ms. Porter.
Good morning, Chair and Vice Chair. As you mentioned, my name is Katie Porter. I'm representing the California Urban Water Agencies, or CUA. And CUA is a non-advocacy organization. We're comprised of the 11 large urban California agencies collectively serving 26 million people, or about 2/3 of the state's population. The purpose of our organization is to inform and help shape public policy, and part of our mission is to utilize the expertise of our member agencies to advance reliable, high-quality water supplies in a cost-effective manner for the public, environment, and economy. We've been leveraging that expertise to help define technical challenges and possible solutions in accessing safe and affordable water. And we've been engaging with you most recently, both your board members as well as your staff, in a recent thought leaders workshop that we held that's part of a Water Research Foundation project we're conducting in conjunction with the Pacific Institute on solutions for underperforming systems. And we thank you for your input and insights to that process. We also support the work that the state is doing on the needs assessment and the concept of sustainably sized community systems. And we see our work on the Water Research Foundation report as a complement to advancing those concepts while that needs assessment is being conducted. So we think that they can work in tandem. And we're very encouraged to hear from yesterday's discussion about all of the streamlining that is happening with the funding processes to try to advance projects faster. We think that will be a great help. And we appreciate the opportunity today to provide our thoughts on implementing this administrator program and on the administrator handbook, which we see as one component of a toolbox. And so I think the comments that we have is framing this specific component, but we don't want to lose the larger context of all the different tools that are there. For the handbook itself, in general, the handbook intro states that the purpose is to provide further guidance. The way that it's currently developed is more written as a policy framework, which is appropriate, and many times it is referred to as policy. And we would like to see more in the way of guidance to who is actually going to be the administrators and how they're going to take that over. We think it could benefit greatly from those who have been through the process, such as Russ Bryden and some of the comments that he's made, and some of our other agencies as well that have had elements of this in working with some of their neighboring communities. Some key areas that we think could benefit from elaboration. First is clarifying the criteria and process for selecting water systems that would need administrators. We know this is tangential to what you're trying to articulate in the handbook itself, but we think that this is very important to understand how you are going to identify and prioritize these systems and look for where you can have these early actions to improve the water supply. We know that these situations are likely to be applied to those that have persistent water quality issues that have not been able to resolve some of these on their own. So it would be helpful to understand what triggers the use of the administrator. We noted that you have some definitions about emergencies and imminent threats to public, but given that a lot of these systems have had chronic issues, there seems to already be some element of that status complicit in where they already are. And so understanding why a system qualifies to have an administrator also could inform the role of the administrator in understanding whether it's a project-specific role or whether they have to take over operations. And so that leads me to then the second point, which is room for clarifying the process for selecting the administrators. And other speakers this morning have talked about the process, and the handbook starts with the assumption that the administrator has been identified. We would like to understand better how those administrators are identified. There was reference yesterday to not having a pool of administrators, and we'd be curious to know if that is the state's intent, to have a ready pool that they would draw from. We'd like to understand whether this is a voluntary basis, if the potential administrators is something that would be opt into, or if when you use the term appointed, if the state board is going to direct someone to take over a system or be the administrator of the system. And if that is the case, are there opportunities to discuss, negotiate, or reject the assignment? And complicit in that too is working with the community on understanding how the administrator fits in within the role of the community and communicating with them about the goals for the water system. The criteria for selecting that administrator and what their qualifications are will be different depending on whether they're overseeing a project or whether they're acting as a general manager and overseeing all activities, including operations. And we think that needs to be factored in. And finally, I think as Russ also demonstrated, the administrator will likely be more than a single person or entity. I think there's room for clarification in the handbook about how the state intends to apply the various costs associated with adopting policies, with holding public meetings. There was a suggestion in many communities needing translation services, cost for studies for infrastructure improvements that would include consultants or technical assistance providers. Those are all tangential to the administrator role, but I think very important in getting some of these systems back to servicing and providing safe, clean drinking water. The next point is making sure that you have the accountability for the administrative process, but without hampering progress. And we really support having that post-administrator drinking water service plan in place within the year. We think this will serve as a good accountability to ensure that there is a clear path to sustainability, but would like to recognize that there may be instances where further studies or refinements will be needed, and each situation is unique. So hopefully there is some mechanism for working within that time frame if it is warranted. Additionally, while the goal is to solve issues in the shortest time frame possible, in the most cost-effective manner possible, there should also be some flexibility to understand that for certain health-based issues, the shortest time frame will be the best route. For some other issues, there may be a weighting on overall value from risk and financial perspectives. This may look, as an example, something that might have a more upfront capital cost, like looking at technical solutions such as remote monitoring, but over the lifespan of consideration of water system operations may afford better economies of scale with allowing a single entity to maybe oversee multiple systems as part of a network. So thinking about how this plays out in the long-term solution rather than just the immediate upfront capital. Also wanted to understand about the standard defined term for administrators. How will the state board evaluate the administrator's performance and deem that they are creating a plan that's in the best interest of the system? And creating transparency without compromising water system security. We'd like to make sure that the requirements for making some of these public records available are aligning with the California Public Records Act requirements. Certainly, we want to make sure there is transparency, but not provide information that could be used to the detriment of a community. Finally, with regards to costs, you have the designated water system responsible for ordinary costs that aren't administrative. And one of the concerns is that current processes, while we appreciate that there is potential to access funding, grant funding and loan funding, some of the current processes have that as a reimbursement mechanism, which means that the systems or the administrators who are helping the systems would have to potentially front some of these costs. And in systems that we believe would require an administrator, they may be struggling financially to even have that working capital to start some of these projects. So we think that's something that is worthy of further examination on how to implement. And then with the engagement of communities and engaging partners to help with educating the communities and engaging them in the process and working with the new administrators, we think that's a really important component because there is a potential for some misunderstanding about what is in the best interest of the community and the systems, and want to make sure that everyone is aligned on those goals. And specifically, as you're looking forward to a long-term sustainability plan, where that relates to finances and where that is linked to Prop 218 requirements and your own process in the handbook for protest of the administrator or the suggested solutions, making sure that the state board is providing leadership and strength on some of those decisions that the administrator is making when it's appropriate, while still listening to the community's concerns and making sure that the concerns aren't hampering the progress that needs to be made. There has to be ways to tease apart how we can resolve those issues. The last point I'd like to make is around the idea of preventing new unsustainable systems from forming. This process is not for preventing new systems, but it is tangential to bringing everything full circle. We heard yesterday about more coordination with land use planners, and I think that is a great idea. I'd love to see that direction, and stopping the bleeding on creating new systems that don't already have the built-in technical, managerial, and financial capacity. And so how does this process with the administrators tie back into the decisions that were made when allowing these systems to operate? And is there a role for land use planning agencies in this administrator process, in advising or in being part of the solution? So finally, I would like to say that the administrator approach alone may not get to community to that level of sustainability. It's good that the administrator process and plan defines a path for development of technical, managerial, and financial capacity, and allows the decision for either the systems to stand on their own or the decision for these systems to be incorporated to another entity if they cannot stand on their own as independent. We'd like to see if there are other mechanisms that can be put in place to help these systems and help make that decision. As I mentioned earlier, that this is one toolbox, one tool in the toolbox of options, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive. So for instance, mutual aid came up earlier, and we think this could be an important part of looking at mutual aid in conjunction with administrator concepts. As part of our Water Research Foundation report, we're looking at the concepts of partnership zones. We're examining systems that are within a 30-mile radius based on input from those who have had to work with multiple systems within the course of a day. And this can include everything from physical consolidation, but as you heard in yesterday's data, that physical connections beyond 3 miles could be cost prohibitive. So partnership zones would also incorporate other concepts as well with technical assistance and mutual aid. And there are already precedents for that within the California Water Wastewater Agency Response Network, CalWARN, and the Emergency Services Act that don't necessarily require declaration of emergency for systems to assist each other. We also want to make sure there's robust discussion on the understanding of what systems should have to pay for safe water versus what they are able to pay. And this relates to a lot of the thinking that's happening in other forums. I recognize, and part of the needs assessment that the state board is doing, I think that's an important discussion to have, the difference between system level costs and individual household costs. And these are complicated relationships, and they're important topics to discuss, but it could be what leads to some of that misunderstanding and communication in making these financial decisions for the long-term health of a utility. We hope that we continue to strive for ways to leverage technology when we're thinking about building long-term capacity, and we look forward to continuing engaging in the dialogue and collectively capitalize on this opportunity to define and execute lasting solutions for safe, affordable water for all Californians. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful comments, Ms. Porter. Next panel member, Jack Hawks from California Water Association. California Water Association.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Good to see you.
Esquivel and Vice Chair Diadamo and the staff. Jack Hawks, California Water Association. CWA is the state trade group for the PUC regulated water utilities. Today there are 93 regulated water utilities. 25 years ago there were 250 PUC regulated utilities, so consolidation has been part of our, has been hardwired into our model here for some time. About 1.6 million connections, about 6 million Californians served. The PUC actually has assistance programs for the troubled systems on our side of the ledger. We provide regulatory assistance. We provide TMF assistance through our larger utilities, our Class A water utilities, helping out our smaller utilities. We have low-income customer assistance programs, that's ratepayer assistance, and then the consolidation that I just mentioned. We've gained some administrator experience ourselves in the last 5 years without having been part of the administrator program yet. We've completed 18 consolidations since 2014. We have 7 pending or announced right now. Of the completed ones, 12 were indeed water investor-owned utilities, regulated utilities, 4 of them mutual water companies. 1 was a county water district, and 1 was a community services district. Of the pending 7 right now, 3 are regulated utilities, 3 are municipal systems, and 1 is a county water district. Too many buttons to push here. One of the things I'd like to see the handbook put in the preface is the reality that the administrator is going to face. And everything that Russ Bryden said absolutely needs to be in that handbook in the beginning of it as far as what the administrator is going to face. But here's really what they're going to face. Most of these systems are barely solvent. Most have subsidized their own systems, either through their money out of their own pockets or work sweat equity out of their own bodies without getting compensated. In our world, most of these systems are fully depreciated, but in the public sector world, they'd be the equivalent of fully depreciated. Most are reluctant to invest in the systems and have the accompanying anguish of raising rates. And so that's, you know where we are on that score. Most are sincere about water quality compliance. I think that's a big plus for a small water system. They care greatly about trying to maintain compliance with their drinking water. As Russ said, most are very uncomfortable with regulatory agencies. On our side, the PUC, on the water board side, outside of the PUC world. On the other hand, most of them desperately need regulatory assistance. And most are not millennials, they're not Gen Xers, they're not even late baby boomers. They're like me, early baby boomers or before. 21st century communications are not their friend, and they are ready to leave. They want to retire. And that is the real world for system administrators, I believe. So as far as the handbook is concerned, I just have some specifics to go through here. The handbook mirrors the legislation, AB 2501, the AB 2501 provisions. That's all good and well. You need the clarity for the designated water systems to see what they're going to be getting into. You absolutely need to address the community and the administrator expectations. The handbook draft does that. But I believe the handbook needs to go well beyond what's in the legislation as far as the language and the provisions in the handbook. Again, the first section, there ought to be a section there on what the administrator is going to face. As Russ pointed out, there are legal and liability issues that are going to be inside the door once they open that door. I think the due diligence requirements, and I'll come back to this one, but that needs to be spelled out at the outset. The immediate operational challenges, capital needs. What's the administrator going to do when the staff leaves a week after the administrator begins work at the utility, and the O&M needs? I think the handbook needs a Q&A section for the administrator. It says most of this handbook is devoted to the community, and the public outreach requirements spelled out in legislation. Again, that's absolutely necessary. But the prospective administrators need some additional information in this handbook. It's a two-way vehicle here. It's for the communities and it's for the administrators. And there needs to be, as I say, a Q&A section here addressing the geographic distance that Tara talked about yesterday. Yeah, probably 3 miles is the max on physical interconnection, physical consolidation. But as far as the administrator is concerned, you can go further, and I'm thinking of a 25 to 50 mile radius from if the administrator is indeed a utility or a public agency or a consulting firm or a O&M contractor, whatever. You can drive some distance to, I believe, serve the community. We do it in our world, in the PUC world, and I'm thinking, 25 to 50 miles. For a non-physical consolidation, but for managerial consolidation, rate consolidation, et cetera. The contractual provisions that the Water Board envisions I think there should be some Q&A on that. Again, the legal liability risks. A lot of these troubled systems that may well be identified as designated systems by the Water Board are probably in the, the wildland urban interface, high threat fire zones. Administrator needs to be, in the Water Board, and they need to be cognizant of those issues with respect to wildfires. I think a rank ordering of the infrastructure improvements should be something that the administrator recommends to the Water Board. Criteria for the post-administrator handoff. And I'm going to come back to this one, but I'll say it now. The legislation and the handbook default to the system being returned to the original owners, operators, managers. That should not be the default. The default should be the path to consolidation. And the secondary consideration is the return to the original operator. I'll come back to all that. On the purpose and objective in the handbook, again, the implementing 2501 is fine for the principal objective. The other ones with respect to the public outreach, they're all good, but I think there's some incomplete objectives in here, and one is ensuring that the administrator knows what she or he is getting into, the risk recognition, the risk management, and I'm talking about both from the customer standpoint and the employee of the administrator's standpoint. When you go in to fix a troubled small system, you send your employees in there. There are safety risks on day one for the employees. And I think that should be acknowledged in the handbook. All consolidations have unique circumstances, and I think the handbook should talk about some of the potential scenarios. The law of unintended consequences is going to happen with these administrators. Russ faced it already. One of our own, California American Water, faced it when they acquired a mutual water company in the Central Valley. On day one, they had ended up having operational issues. So it's the stuff that even when you do due diligence assessment is not necessarily going to happen exactly the way you think it is. On the selection of the administrator, again, all the public outreach, that's all good. And the same thing on the emergency conditions. I think that's all fine. The handbook doesn't need to be revised on those 2 points. I do think some of the points that Katie brought up here that need to be addressed in the handbook, is the Water Board going to build a a roster of administrators? And will the administrators be individuals, existing utilities, O&M firms, consultants, whatever? Russ is right again. It may be possible for a 50 connection system for a single, retired GM to do it, but it's really going to be a team. You need the regulatory and the operations and the engineering folks in there to help out. So that was interesting that the handbook and the legislation seem to be envisioning a single person, but I have always thought from day one, from last year on 2501, that it was going to be another utility or a water agency that would be the administrator here. So I would like the handbook to clarify that point. And I know David mentioned it. The handbook right now doesn't have minimum qualifications in there, but I'm glad you're going to put them in there. That'll be good. That needs to be in there. And as I said earlier, I think the candidates for administrators ought to have the opportunity to do some kind of a due diligence report to give to assessment to give to the Water Board staff on what they feel are the immediate priority tasks that need to be done with the system if they're selected to be the administrator. So those are some additions I would put under the selection section. On the obligations, okay, the handbook starts off with conflicts of interest as the first obligation. I'm not sure that's the first obligation for the administrator. That's part and parcel with any contractual relationship that any of the entities would have with the Water Board and the community to ensure no issues with conflicts. The public meetings, that's fine. But to me, the first obligation, and one of your public speakers, the last one, said that earlier, I think the first obligation for the administrator is to engender confidence in the community by demonstrating competence and enthusiasm for solving the system problems. Whoever goes in there is going to have to demonstrate to the customers that they have a passion to help fix that system. And otherwise, you're not going to gain the confidence of the community. And to me, that's the first obligation. That should be spelled out in the handbook. Second one is to convey to the community in that initial meeting, what needs to be done with this system to bring it up. It's, Russ goes in, he's thinking it's brown water. I don't think he really thought that, but I think he knew there was more there. But I think we all did on Sativa. But I think you owe it to the community to tell them everything that's wrong with this system that needs to be fixed for them. And so therefore, to me, the administrator obligations are the due diligence assessment and the operational plan, the initial operational plan. And then the third one is you have to try to allay the fears of the customers on the cost and the rate impacts as much as you possibly can. So to me, that's the heart of the administrator obligation. On the cost side, I would prefer the handbook to flip the order of the cost discussion here. The customers, I don't think you need to lead with all the costs that the water board is going to cover. The customers are more interested in what is going to be coming out of their rates and what potential. I would prefer that the handbook talk about the designated water systems projected costs in ongoing operations and in what's going to be needed to help fix up the system. And then the next section are all the water board costs about the administrator's compensation and the administrative costs. I hate leading with administrative costs. It's the substantive costs for the fixing up the system I think that the customers are interested in. But anyway, I would just flip the order and subordinate the administrative management costs to the O&M capital improvement cost. And also, Darren, I'd like for you to be able to be more precise in the split, in the narrative between the costs that are going to be the capital and O&M costs that are going to be part of the systems and the customers' rates, and what can come from the water board as part of the $130 million for capital improvements. It's like the handbook says funding for construction, planning projects, ongoing O&M requirements, but it's a maybe because it's feasible. I think and I'd like for the water board to be more, or the handbook to be more affirmative in what the water board will be able to provide during this administrative period. So as far as the cost assistance is concerned. So on the post-administrator service plan, I mentioned this yesterday about it's good that the plan has the discussion of the TMF issues and the competencies. That's all very good. I do think, again, that the path to consolidation should be the default assumption. The return of the system to the original owner, operator, manager should be predicated on the TMF assessment per the Health and Safety Code 116.540. That's the funding. That's the section for the funding that the water board provides that they have to assess for new systems and acquired systems. I would just add this to, I know it's not in the statute, but I think the water board could have the latitude to add these TMF assessment protocols to this program as well. And then in our world, we're assuming that if we're administrators, that ultimately we'll consolidate the systems. The handbook is not clear on that point. And actually, it assumes that the administrator is going to be in for 12 months or 24 months and then gone. But I think the handbook should include the possibility of the administrator, especially if it's another utility, to assume ownership and operation. So.
On that point, Mr. Hawks,
yeah.
I think we've heard quite a bit today about the need for communities to be in the driver's seat around those sorts of decisions. So do you see that there may be an inherent conflict for an administrator that's brought in that may not be sort of, I guess, unbiased as to what happens to that system at the end of that time, or or what happens there. There may be a conflict is all I'm saying, perhaps in that, just some thought.
I got to believe we can work it out. It's if...
Just saying, if the administrator has an ultimate goal in mind in there.
All
I
right.
mean, the administrator should, but if they're the entity that then will also be ultimate, yeah, I mean, there's I think maybe a discussion somewhere in there.
I know. I just worry that at the end of the period, there's vulnerability there for the community and the system that we ought to try to overcome during that time frame. So, okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hawks. I'd like to have our next panelist, Mr. Claiborne, Michael Claiborne from the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning, and thank you to the chair and the board. I'm here joined with Isabel Solorio from the community of Lanier. I'll have a few points today, and then I'll turn my time over to Isabel to talk about Lanier's experience with receivership and the lessons learned through that process. Before I start the comments that I had prepared for today, I'd like to mention a couple of themes that I think came out of the prior comments that we'd agree with. First, Mr. Bryden suggested that this should be a team approach. I agree completely with that suggestion. I would just note that the community, from my view, is the most important member of that team and the most important stakeholder throughout the process. And then another theme from the prior comments that Mr. Bryden and I think Jack just mentioned was the importance of rebuilding trust, and that being a goal of this process and a critical piece of a successful receivership and administrator process. So the authority to appoint an administrator has the potential to be a powerful tool for addressing mismanagement, for effective oversight of capital projects, and to ensure the delivery of safe and affordable drinking water to communities that are currently facing crisis. It also presents, I think, a significant risk of abuse, and if not properly implemented, it has the potential to frustrate accountability to the community that owns the water system. The state board must, from our view, diligently oversee the administrative program to prevent abuse and require that community is fully informed and involved in important decisions that are made by the administrator. As many in this room know, Lanier Community Service District is presently in receivership overseen by the Fresno Superior Court. And I'd note that Leadership Council represents Lanier CSD in that proceeding, but we're not here in a representative capacity today. Receivership is directly analogous to the new administrator authority with at least one important difference that makes a difference here. In a receivership, the court has the ultimate responsibility and duty of oversight of the receiver. In an administrator process, the state board will be stepping in to take that duty that in a receivership would be taken by the court. And they have a similar duty of oversight to make sure that this process works and to avoid abuse. And we'd ask that the state board take that authority very, very seriously, and we know that you all will. A few points regarding the draft handbook, which we'll expand upon in writing. First, we're concerned that the draft allows the state board to avoid some of the key provisions of AB 2501 that were included in the legislation to give community a role from the beginning of the process, starting with selection of the administrator in the event that there's an emergency. And I think that can be appropriate in certain circumstances, but the definition of emergency is pretty broad. As I think Ms. Porter noted a moment ago, it includes situations where there's an acute contaminant present, and that would include situations like Lanier, which faced arsenic contamination for a long period of time. So we're concerned that this broad definition is going to avoid public process that really could be done in situations like Lanier faced and really should be done. I think that community being involved from the beginning of the process is really, really important to establishing trust, to ensuring that the proper decisions regarding selection of administrator and then every decision after that are community-led. So we're going to be asking for a narrower definition of emergency at a minimum, and we'll propose that definition in writing. We think that will allow for better decision-making and, like I said, go a long way to instilling trust. And then second, there's a conflict of interest provision in the administrator handbook. It requires, in the event the prospective administrator has a conflict of interest, that administrator notify the state board. It doesn't, from our reading, require anything else, and it doesn't require that be taken into consideration when selecting an administrator. That's something that's particularly personal for residents of Lanier, given that the receiver in that instance was also Lanier's primary creditor when they were appointed. And that, I think, just from experience, didn't lead to a lot of trust between the receiver and the community from the start, where the receiver's both operating a system and paying back a loan to themselves. It wasn't a great situation. I think in Lanier, there weren't a lot of people ready and willing to jump in as receiver at that time. But if we're going to be developing a broader program with, I don't know if it was stable or a group of people and companies ready to be administrators, that's something I think we can avoid, and we absolutely should if we can. And then as a third point, we're concerned with the idea that appointment of an administrator may, in many cases, lead to privatization or consolidation of a water system. It's not necessarily a bad result in all cases, and we generally support consolidation, have some concerns about privatization, but if it's the decision the community wants, it's not necessarily a bad result. However, it becomes a significant concern if and when the result is contrary to the will of the community that the administrator is going to be serving. And I'd remind the state board that public water systems are often run by, or are run by, democratically elected boards, and appointment of an administrator with the idea or the default or the goal to privatize that system when it's not something the community wants frustrates that democratically elected board. And I'll stop there and turn the time over to Isabel to talk more about her experience through receivership. And as a lead into her testimony, I'd just add a few points about the Lanier receivership. I want to note that in many ways that receivership has been a success. Lanier now has safe drinking water. They don't have arsenic contamination. And that's both a testament to the action and support from the community that have advocated for drinking water solutions for more than a decade, but also to the receiver's operation and management of capital projects and the water system throughout that process. However, there have been some rough patches throughout the process that Isabel will talk about that could have been avoided through inclusion of the community and selection of the receiver, better public process, trust building, and a commitment to transparency from the start. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Isabel.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Mi nombre es Isabel Solorio, vengo de la comunidad de Lanier en el condado de Fresno. Voy a hablar un poco de la experiencia de lo que ha pasado en Lanier. Gracias a Dios tenemos agua limpia. La experiencia trabajando con recibidor ha sido un poco difícil. Ha tomado mucho tiempo y esfuerzo porque, para que sean más transparentes, que cuando nosotros pedíamos documentos o información financiera era muy difícil. Además, había una deuda de la cual se pagaban ellos mismos. Pedíamos información de dicha deuda. Para mí eso es un conflicto de interés. Ellos hicieron buen trabajo, claro, con ayuda del Estado. Se han puesto medidores en la comunidad, eso está muy bien. Se ha pagado la deuda que se debía. Se ha renovado toda la infraestructura en la comunidad. Es importante que el Estado tenga más comunicación con la comunidad. Por ejemplo, en el 2010 tuvimos una emergencia en la cual nos quedamos sin agua. Estaba la temperatura a más de 100 grados, nadie nos resolvía, nadie nos respondía. Hay niños, hay ancianos. Era un día muy difícil. Finalmente pudimos resolver la comunidad. Mi recomendación en esta nueva ley de la SB 200, que haya más información sobre dicha ley. Una pregunta, ¿cuándo y cada cuándo se van a reunir estos miembros? ¿Quién supervisará a estos miembros? Que haya de nuevo la comunicación con la comunidad. Además, si se tomara la opción de usar un administrador que sea un administrador calificado, mi recomendación sería capacitar personas locales en las cuales ayudarían en el manejo y en el mantenimiento de dichos sistemas. Además, ofrecerían empleados a los residentes. Lo más importante, comunicación con la comunidad. Además, cada comunidad tenemos diferentes necesidades. Somos comunidades que son mixtas de dos razas, raza hispana, latina y raza afroamericana, un poco de raza blanca. Hay que tomar mucho en cuenta esos detalles porque al final nosotros somos los que carecemos de esos problemas. Muchas gracias por tomar su tiempo, por escucharnos. Estoy encantada de estar poniendo mi ejemplo de lo que ha sucedido en mi comunidad. Ha sido un problema muy serio, pero a nosotros nos interesa qué sucede en nuestra comunidad. Hay más miembros atrás que vienen a acompañarme. Hemos formado un grupo en el cual todos somos voluntarios, a nadie se nos paga. Queremos mejoras, queremos echar para adelante nuestra comunidad y que nuestra gente tengamos una mejor calidad de vida. Gracias.
Good morning. Can you hear me on this? My name is Isabel Solorio, and I'm here from Lanier in Fresno County. And I want to share a bit about my experience with everything that's happened in Lanier. Fortunately, today we have clean water, but our experience working with a receiver was somewhat difficult. It has taken a very long time and a lot of effort on our part because, well, rather, in order for them to be more transparent. When we used to ask for documents or financial information or the like, it was very difficult to get anything from them. In addition, there was a debt that they were the creditor for, so they were paying that back to themselves. And we would ask for information about that debt, and we didn't get anything. To me, that's a conflict of interest. At the end of the day, they did a good job, of course, with the help of the state. They have installed meters in the community, which I think is great. They have paid off the debt that was pending. They have renewed all of the infrastructure in our community. And it is important for the state to be in closer communication with our communities. For example, in 2010, we had a water emergency. We had no water when it was over 100 degrees out, and no one responded, no one would resolve it. We have kids, we have elderly people in our community. So it was a very difficult day. We were finally, as a community, able to overcome that. So my recommendations for this new law, SB 200, would be to have more information about the law for the community and to know how often the members are going to be meeting and who is going to supervise those members. And again, to have communication with our community. Also, if you decide to use an administrator, to make sure that they meet with certain qualifications. My recommendation would also be to train local people in the community. This would to help with the managing and operation and maintenance of these systems. As a side benefit, this would also be a source of employment for the community. But most importantly, as I said, communication with our community. Each community has different needs. And a lot of these communities are mixed. We have different ethnic groups living together. We have Hispanic, Latinos, we have African Americans, a few white people. So we have to take all of that into account because at the end of the day, we are the ones that have to bear the burden for these issues. Thank you very much for giving us the time to be here and to listen to us. I'm very pleased to be able to be here and share what has happened in my community with you. It's been a very serious problem, but we are interested in what's going on in our community. In fact, there are other community members in the back in the public who came with me. We created a group where we all serve as volunteers. None of us get paid a dime for this. All we want is to see improvements. We want for our community to move forward and for our people to have a better quality of life. Thank you.
Gracias tanto para tu tiempo, señora Solario, y para compartir con nosotros sus experiencias. Gracias.
And just really briefly, I wanted to highlight one thing that Isabel just mentioned that I realized I forgot to talk about. In Lanier, the state granted technical assistance dollars to self-help enterprises to work with a new board for Lanier CSD and build up that technical expertise to be able to take over with an aim to taking over the water system. That's something that should absolutely be done in conjunction with administrators where it makes sense, and can also be added with different community employment development programs to try to develop operators throughout a community as well.
Thank you. Vice Chair, do you have any questions for any of our panelists?
I just want to thank you all for your very thoughtful comments. I learned a lot today and want to thank staff also. And I just appreciate that staff is wanting to be measured here because my head's really spinning. There seems to be so many different ways to approach this. And so I think that what you proposed so far, Mr. Polhemus, is on track. Get started and then, come back with lessons learned. I do have a few questions for Mr. Bryden in particular, since you've been there. How was it that you got into a situation where you knew so little going in, and what can we do to correct that going forward? That was sort of what troubled me the most.
Yeah, that's not a yes or no question. I think there's a lot of thought behind answering that question. I'll share some of my thoughts with that. Special districts are required by law to file an annual audit. In the case of Sativa, it's my understanding that they hadn't done that for a number of years. That at some point, I think in the 2014-15 period, they actually went back and had to complete audits for a 5 or 6 year period. At that point, they had something like an administrator. They actually brought in a temporary GM to try to help them get back on their feet. I don't know what happened after that GM, but there were issues with, like I mentioned, their financial controls and record keeping. We didn't have any good tools to understand their financial position. The only thing we can rely on was their audits. And so it's causing us to question the accuracy of the audits that were performed before, and there's other actions being taken around that. But from what I've seen, we should have the tools to be able to identify those that are in dire financial conditions. I think that there's been a lot of work on this, but I think that you could take a look at where an agency is investing, what they're spending their funds are, and use that as a kind of surrogate stress test. I'm aware of several people, including a former LA Regional Board member, that's exploring those areas. I don't know. I think that's probably the place to start.
Yeah, those are some good thoughts. It just seems to me that we need to have a better idea as to what we're getting ourselves into, because then once we appoint an administrator, we want to make sure that they have the resources to be successful. And so the concern that I have is if we, of course, the communities and we as a board want to go as fast as we can, but we need to make sure that, especially in the beginning, that we have a successful launch. Word will get out that if this doesn't go well, and then there's already the challenge of distrust of regulators.
I think that's very true.
So, and I know, Mr. Hawks, you've had some experience. Did you have anything to add?
That when the State Water Board identifies or designates a water system for this program, and they do the initial communication with the community, I think that at that point they should have the candidate administrator be introduced to the community and allow the potential administrator to interview and survey the system and do this due diligence assessment, the initial due diligence assessment that I was referring to, and have that part of the initial selection process here. I think that's the only way the Division of Drinking Water is going to be able to, know what it's getting into. Yeah, it's going to be tricky, though, because they're going to have to designate the water system to begin with before actually knowing everything that's wrong. But maybe there can be a two-step process here on the designation. And there's an initial approach to the system, and then a final designation once the staff here at the Water Board reviews this due diligence assessment. I think it's the only, otherwise you're right. You're gonna, it may be a trap, and to get this program successful and start it off right, we need to have a whole bunch of successes here in the initial year of this of the program. So
I think it's a stress test. You need a way to triggers to look for to do further investigation.
Yeah, and I think Ms. Porter mentioned the idea of triggers also, and you had so many ideas, and I was writing as quickly as I could, and then I realized I just need to sit back and listen, because you all had a lot of really good ideas. But one in particular that just resonates for me is Ms. Sorloyo's comment about training local people. We know that these communities do not currently have the technical, managerial, financial capacity, but that doesn't mean that they won't ever have that. And so I really like the idea of the minimum qualifications for the administrator, and then maybe the administrator can then develop through recommendations from the handbook, where there's a whole team that's coming in, but many of those jobs could be done locally. And so I know that's an additional thing to take on, but the idea is as light of touch as possible from the state, and get the communities into a situation where they can be more empowered. And I have no doubt, with proper training, that that the communities will be able to assist either at some point entirely, and if not, in the long-term future, be participating in a very significant way in the operation of the system. So thank you very much for your comments. Appreciate you all being here and continuing to be engaged.
Thank you, Board Member. Yeah, it is a critical point that we're looking to really empower communities through these resources and these programs, and not just kind of parachute in with outside resources and say we're going to fix it. And that, I mean, this is really about tools, and ultimately a program that is driven by communities for community solutions for the long term. And so certainly the administrator handbook is just one of those tools. Administrators are a tool we're excited to develop in the state that we haven't really done. And again, to Darren's point, it's sort of, it's exciting to be able to try to develop it, but also a bit daunting because there's so much to try to consider. And we're fortunate then to be able to have an iterative process around this handbook. We are going to be coming back and updating it soon and often once we do go to adoption here. And this workshop has been very helpful to really just set out this first iteration of what will be hopefully a very successful, obviously, program. And it will be if we continue to have these discussions where we daylight the complexity of the challenges the administrators will face, and really who they are. At this point is part of the real challenge is who are these pool of potential folks, and not necessarily, to Mr. Bryden's point, retired GMs are out there that are just trying to, do something as a part-time, work. This is a full-time enterprise here. And to the issue of, individual administrator teams, I definitely see, and we talked about this yesterday as well in the context of SB 200 and the funds and how we'll prioritize those. But it really is, wraparound services, and it is really going to be about developing teams and not necessarily all on one person, because it can never be possibly just one person, I'm sure, Mr. Bryden. Well, thank you all. Again, we really appreciated today's comments and public input. I would like to flag that we will be putting the presentations online, so everyone has access to everyone's presentations here. It will also be archived, so we can look back and make sure to take better notes around Ms. Porter's points. But do know that, again, this is only a continuation of a discussion that we have already also been engaged in prior to this, so we really appreciate everyone here, your involvement, your continued leadership around not just the administrator discussion, but the Safe and Affordable Fund implementation and providing safe and clean drinking water to all Californians. So thank you. Really appreciate it. I think that ends item number 8 then. Mr. Lawfer, I don't think we have board member reports or anything as any of our items. So with that, I think we will bring this workshop to conclusion. And
Correct.
No
We'll
closed
go
session?
ahead and close it, and there will not be a closed
No
session,
closed session.
which the minutes
Okay.
will reflect.
Thank you, everyone, again. Really appreciate it.